So before Magdalena gets started, I'll just give you some background information on her. Magdalena is an established talent and leadership coach, a mentor and TEDx speaker, and best-selling author of Get Productive, Boosting Your Productivity and Getting Things Done, which is currently number 18 in the top 50 entrepreneurial books, 2012. Magdalena is our resident expert on personal productivity and top-level finance. And in addition to working as organizational consultant and executive coach to top talent and senior staff at Imperial, she also runs her own company, Make Time Count Limited. Magdalena began her career as a neuroscientist and moved into coaching and organizational development 10 years ago to follow her passion for helping equip others with skills to make time count. Combining neuroscience insights with practical psychology for sustained top-level productivity and peak performance, Magdalena is a person organizations and individuals across the world call on to develop their talent. She supports top-level scientists, global NGO leaders, creatives and CEOs as a leadership coach and thinking partner, including G8 Summit and World Economic Forum participants. The Get Productive Wheel that Magdalena will be discussing today is an approach to thinking that she's pioneered to help everyone improve their resourcefulness and personal power. The wheel is currently in use within coaching, occupational medicine, education, top scientific institutions, and leadership and team building within businesses. If you're interested in being a case study for her next book, please contact Magdalena after the talk. I know this is something she's really keen on getting more people coming forward for, so if you're interested, please get in touch. Magdalena is also one of the key speakers at many professional and business conferences and is headlining the Association for Coaching National Conference this September, Time to Develop. So it's my great pleasure to hand you over to Magdalena now for this webinar. Many thanks.
Nice to be with you, everybody, and a warm welcome to wherever you are joining us from. So we will get straight to it to leave us time for questions at the end. Welcome to this webinar. If you're interested in improving your thinking, creating better results, more success, innovation, engagement, if you're wanting to have people working with you and for you and loving it, I hope that you will pick something up from today that might be of help. What I will be sharing with you in this webinar are 13 very simple and highly effective thinking strategies for high performance that I have seen work really well. Now, to put this in a little bit of context, I won't spend too much time on that, particularly in UK, as you will see in terms of the figures and things that I'm interested in terms of our output in the workforce. We are behind other industrialized nations in terms of our productivity on average. I know these numbers are coming up, but we still are quite a long way below others. Now, equally, one thing that particularly interests me is workplace absence and sickness, and a lot of those are coming from what some of my colleagues in occupational medicine are diagnosing as not really illness, but basically common reasons that are to do with confidence around getting work done, motivation to be at work, and people choosing to stay at home and, quote, be sick without real medical illness. And that's something that we definitely want to tackle. So as you can see, being able to maintain high productivity, whether it's for yourself, for people you work with in your small business or a very large company, or a global company, is really key. It is key for business, it is key for the world, but it's also really, really key for personal satisfaction and our own well-being. And I'm known, at least in UK, for coining the term of holistic productivity, meaning that we want people to be productive and get results, but also remain healthy and help other people be healthy doing so. So what do I mean by high productivity? What I mean by it is consistent, outstanding results that are delivered through and with others unhealthy terms. So this is something where you don't become a one-shot and then a crash. It is about maintaining particular standards. It's about continuous output and doing so with a smile and a light way of being. So there's a way of doing things, but also a way of being. So that will mean a certain attitude and a certain habits that you will develop to continuously deliver. Now, productivity, of course, is so many different things when we're looking at individuals or teams or whole companies. But it is about good ideas, for sure. It is about productive or effective thinking that generates competitive advantage, that helps come up with new ideas that are worthwhile and so on. It is about sharing and engaging. It is about doing, and it is about continuous learning. So all those things really come to be associated with productivity, but productivity is, of course, a quite broad discipline. Now, to me, having started in neuroscience, I think that productivity from an individual going outwards to any system is really about thinking quality. And so what do we know from neuroscience about this? Well, one thing that we do know is that our brains are made up of cells called neurons, and those cells are connected by to each other by particular pathways. At any given point, some of those pathways are active. So on the left-hand side, you see there a little mapping in the brain. In this case, it looks like one side of the brain is slightly dominant over the other. And on the right-hand side, you can see the synaptic connection between, two points of contact where some activity is coming through. So that's kind of how our brains work, isn't it? And at any given time, our brains focus on solving problems because we have been trained that way from birth, pretty much. So this sort of question of how do I get from A to B? Now, what neuroscience and what psychology is finding out is that actually the answers that tend to come up first are those that are supported by the strongest connections between cells. So connections that are well honed in, well practiced. So this is where our habits come into place, our biases, and all the things we've tried before and so on. So in this case, going from A to B, well, let's look at a map. How do we get there? Now, what is very interesting in the current climate, in the current way in the Western world, is that as life has gotten faster and there's more information, there's more things grabbing our attention, time pressures, the stress, the need for quick wins, short-term outcomes, it forces the brain to, of course, perform faster, and it takes shortcuts. Now, shortcuts will be anything that is really, really quick to do, where your attention and your knowledge go first. Now, of course, as that happens, other connections get depressed or repressed, and so they don't come up. So in the case here, we have, okay, well, we want to look at a map. Now, of course, too many people these days will Google it, right? Now, what tends to happen with that is that loopy thinking will dominate. So things that are already associated with these concepts will come forward. It'll be easy to recall, easy to come up with, and they'll trap our brain into that sort of thinking, whereas other things will not. And these other things are not necessarily rocket science, but they're just alternatives. They're other ways of looking at it. They're reconstructing the problem, maybe reframing it, maybe asking a totally different question that's related, and what we call, synthetic thinking or thinking in a different way. So in this case, we might have something where we're going to say, well, why don't we not even look at maps because we don't have to travel, we can arrange a Skype call. So it's a pretty simple demonstration to what really happens. So what I've discovered in my work is that brains naturally will try to cut corners, and this is a natural way for the brain to work. If some of you have listened to my past seminar, you will know that the brain is a very energy-rich customer, and so it's doing this to preserve things, and it's also doing it because it's actually an evolutionary advantage to not pay attention to everything. But when we're wanting to think well, this is something we almost have to get out of because we want to do something different. So to visit other ideas, it helps to have a framework, a sort of scaffold that we can run the thinking along particular pathways. And as we do that, we can then think more resourcefully, but do so with speed. And that's something that I'm going to be showing you today. Now, everything in my experience around staying ahead of the competition is about how well we use our minds. And whether that's, as you will see later, because of the networks we're part of, whether that's because of the idea we have or the people we link up with, or because of our ambition and so on. At the end of the day, it does boil down to how well we can use this massively rich organ that we are given, that we can use very, very well. And it is true that our lives and our organizations and business generally really demands more systemic thinking. So looking at the world and sustainability, corporate social responsibility, looking at businesses, looking at ideas that will thrive versus businesses that will fail. We're looking for what some people call creative thinking, but also thinking that allows us to generate a lot of impact quickly. So basically, to do that, to think very resourcefully, we have to override the brain's natural preference to be thinking like a problem solver, but in a very simple, quick, time-pressured way. But we want to do that, of course, in a way that doesn't take ages, because, time to think is a nice idea. But the number one thing that most of my clients or organizations will say is that, in fact, the one thing people don't have is time. Many executives, are really happy to be given an hour or two of just time to think. So being able to master a process where you can transform your thinking, elevate its richness, is really quite important. So what does coaching have to do with all of this? Well, coaching is something that allows you to create conditions where others can think well as well. So as you will probably know, most of us start out by doing things ourselves. I remember when I first started out in research, it was about doing my own work, then slowly mentoring other people to do the work with me, then becoming more ambitious and so on. So we tend to attract people into our enterprises, whether it's our business, whether it's our project and so on, by first doing it ourselves, and it's where we start from. And over time, we might, become linked in collaborations, groups, teams. We might delegate work, and we have this relationship with other people where there is a common goal or something that's linking us together. But really, the sort of pinnacle of that is being able to leverage the sort of strength that comes from working with other people by helping not just ourselves to think well, but by helping other people think well also. And this is something that's really, really important because it amplifies the effect that any talented individual can have, because we now have more than one. And this is really great. And another reason why I think this is so wonderful is that it builds responsibility in the other person because they're thinking for themselves. It builds motivation, it builds their confidence. So it helps to develop other people, and there's nothing better in business than a lot of people that can think well as a group. That's really, really what we're after. And it is true that, in many companies and just generally in terms of our careers, money is important. But in fact, most people and many people that I work with are really attracted to a sense of empowerment and the ability to take ideas, take their visions into a higher level, being surrounded by other people who are visionaries, who are thinkers, who are creatives, and so on. And so basically being able to empower others will mean that as a manager or leader yourself, you will be able to continuously surround yourself with people of high quality. So that's really important. So the bottom line of this means that, I get the time, other people get empowerment through coaching, and all of us succeed more. So that's really, really good. Now, the case for coaching is really interesting. I mean, it's been building up momentum for the last decade or so. And as you can see, many people at work oftentimes are confused. They don't know the decisions they're making. They don't often know the information. And sometimes they don't even perceive their managers or leaders as approachable people to ask. So oftentimes people don't ask. In fact, a few years ago, I did a study around stress at work. And one of the key things that caused stress was a lot of change where people were afraid to ask for information. So being able to develop skill sets of conversation, of questions, is really quite key in any organization. Now, of course, there's beautiful studies, and I've quoted one, but there's many, many of them, that coaching skills, particularly for leaders and managers, boost their own productivity, their own resilience, their own performance, as well as the performance of their teams. So this is something that is now quite well established, although of course there is more need to do research. And in fact, I'm on a working group for looking at how we bridge practitioners and researchers to bridge that gap. But there's one really nice study that was recently quoted in Coaching at Work, around actual ROI on investment into coaching. And as you can see from the figures there, that is really quite impressive. But what is really true, and this is work from CIPD, is that basically what's very, very common now at work is that coaching is increasingly being seen as a skill set for managers. So managers are expected to coach because coaching by external coaches is really quite expensive. And at the end of the day, managers are there day in, day out, and they know and understand the nature of work. So it is really up to every manager and leader to be able to pick up some of the skills that are associated with being able to coach others. So people who can coach come in two varieties. Now, some people are very naturally good at it, and some people go and learn about it, and either one is fine. But basically, what the data suggests is that there is a really strong correlation between people who can coach at work in terms of getting really lasting performance improvements, better relationships with their teams, much more easy culture, a culture of trust and mutual respect, which allows for much more innovation, people coming up with ideas. Now, those managers and leaders themselves become more confident. I've seen their careers rise because they're able to equip other people for change, for top performance, and so therefore they're being selected and seen as very good themselves. They achieve greater staff engagement and commitment to the business, and this is about that extra discretionary effort, that real passion that comes into it. Over the longer term and mid-term, they also save time for everyone because everyone's working more effectively. And of course, they create financial savings within the institution, which is why many organizations are introducing internal coaching programs. And they become masters of performance management because, performance management, particularly around getting the best performance out of our star performer or poor performer, definitely requires coaching skills. So there's a clear case around why you would want to pick up skills as a manager. You're there day to day. Coaching is an effective way of improving performance. And you can coach other people to good outcomes. Now, I've seen this firsthand because I am involved in training managers here at Imperial. I'm also involved with working in other companies with managers, and I've seen the difference that it makes when managers learn how to be able to get that performance through others. And so they develop self-mastery, which is fantastic, but then they're able to produce this ripple effect. And as more and more people become trained in this way of working, we get more efficient, more productive group of people working together. So that's quite key. But of course, as with anything, there are barriers to this, and you might have encountered them yourself, or maybe you're thinking about this. Now, the top barrier, of course, to anything is not having time. When can I do this? How can I do this? The fact that many people oftentimes don't have patience. That includes me, by the way, because coaching is a developmental process, and that's something that's worth remembering, is that, this is something where you're taking someone else along on a journey to development, so it's not going to be a quick win, but it is an investment. People expect results right away, so again, very, very quick outcome, quick result, overachiever mindset can get in the way of becoming a manager coach. Many of us are used to the telling approach because that's what we used to do. There's, of course, the feeling of overwhelm, having loads of agendas, multiple meetings, so much to do, and thinking, well, actually, I just don't have the time for it, I'm barely staying on top of things. The expectations that staff should just know it and do it. So, oftentimes, when I work with people who are themselves very achieving and very organized, very productive, they expect other people to just catch on and do things that well as well. And then oftentimes that results in a carrot-stick approach. So if people are performing very well, they're getting rewarded. If they're not performing very well, they're getting the sort of stick approach. There's the barrier of course, training. So as with everything else, coaching is a skill set. So you might need to go and train in a skill set, and that requires time again. And finally, one of the barriers that some managers and leaders report is, of course, the sort of sense of power relationship between a manager and people on their team, as being in itself a barrier to any trust and openness that coaching would probably want to have. So as you can see that, in practice, coaching can prove a lot harder than one would initially expect when a lot of people say it's just a conversation. So what tends to happen? Usually training takes a few days, but most leaders and managers, in my view, are not looking to become professional coaches. They just want to basically pick up a few skill sets related to that particular way of having that management style. They go and attend the training. They return to work enthusiastic and really happy to put it forward. But then they find it slightly harder than they thought. Perhaps they have a meeting with someone and the coaching approach doesn't lead to quick results. The person's confused, not sure what's going on. Some stick with it for a while, but many quit. And so what I thought is that might be a different approach that will work just as well, or perhaps even quicker than this sort of training. So what I want to share with you today is a nifty, quick way to help you coach yourself as well as coach other people for better performance that I think takes just a few minutes. Now, initially it might take you 20 minutes or so, but eventually you'll get really, really good at it. All the people on my programs, all my clients use this all the time, and they get amazing results. So we do know that it works. And that's really, really important because it's based around something that is so simple, because it's something that we already do. And all we have to be able to do in that kind of an approach is to switch our brain into this curiosity with a purpose. And the purpose will be an anchor. And that's it. So what I will be showing you is basically how we can plant an anchor around a particular topic, a particular issue, use questions that all have this basic start of, who, what, how, where, and so on. And then use the structure of this wheel to be able to visit different sectors of your brain, to be able to create extra synergy and to come up with ideas that will ultimately be richer, but in a record amount of time. So we're looking for speed and quality thinking. And why is this important? Because at the end of the day, conversations are really key to any business. So nothing happens without a conversation in today's world. Even though we're so technology rich, in fact, we're still really just thinking about connecting with people. And even the conversation you probably had with yourself this morning about how you're going to motivate yourself, how you're going to execute things, what's on your agenda, was actually a conversation. So we need those conversations for ourselves, but also to develop other people. And it's something that we've learned to do early on. So, which is why in literature, coaching is always linked to change and transformation, because every time we're motivating ourselves, we're having a conversation. So what I'm going to show you is really based around things that your brain already comes equipped with. So there's nothing new in this bit of material at all. We're all used to thinking about challenges, issues, problems, and successes. So those are going to be our anchors. We're all used to thinking as kids in terms of questions. So, I think until the age of 5, all we do is we ask questions of our parents, our elders, and everybody else who's around, how do things work? So this is how our brains naturally do things, and all we have to do is let them do it. This approach will be based on common sense. It'll be looking at anchors, open questions, and having a wheel. It's fun, it's quick, it's practical, it's natural, so it should come to you fairly intuitively. It is very simple. Sometimes people think it's too simple to be working, but it does. It's very efficient and it's powerful. So no more heavy theory and coaching complexity. We're going to be doing things in a simple way. Now, how did this wheel come about? So a few years ago, I set myself a challenge. I decided to create a workshop that would be 60 minutes long, that would be a whole day time management training course. And I succeeded. This course worked for everyone from frontline staff all the way to CEOs, and it was based around one simple concept, which was lateral thinking. So basically using common productivity strategies that we all know and being able to tell a story around it that relates to our own context, and therefore using our own brain to be able to consciously come up with ideas for change. And that actually worked. From that, this book was born, which was mentioned earlier in the seminar, but I don't want to talk about it too much. The key message in that book that I think works so well for people who like that sort of approach is that it lets you reflect. From that reflection, your brain comes up with ideas and concepts that you own and that you think are a good idea, which will automatically make you act because, we're all smart people. If we think of something good to do, we just go on and do it. And that seems to work. So based on the work I've been doing, I've come up with what I now call 12 thinking strategies for increasing performance. And people who will implement these strategies and begin to learn how to use them get better results over time, they're more successful, they develop greater self-awareness, they have less stress, they're far more confident and resilient, they're well-networked, and they tend to be on top of things and in control, which is not a bad place to be. So I will go through them now in the seminar fairly quickly, but the slides are there with you, so you can come back to them later on. So starting at the top, in our red zone, we've got 3 strategies that are to do with sort of systems and looking at things in a larger way. Now, others is about looking at and asking questions around how do the relationships I have with other people help me get something done? Ripples is about maximizing the impact you have. So looking at how do I generate the biggest benefit for the effort expended? How do I take a national campaign and make it international, for example? And energy is to do with the system inside us, which is the system of our body, and looking at being able to manage that system so that we both don't tire, don't exhaust, and are able to match that energy to a given task. So all 3 of these particular strategies are regularly forgotten in the work context and underutilized. Now, what we get from this, the slides are freezing at the moment. Let me just wait so they can catch up with us. We're having a little technical glitch. Oh, there we go. Let's see. Yep. So what we get from these 3 strategies are, of course, questions for each one of those sectors that we can consciously run inside our brain. So, for example, here's a series of them to give you some ideas, but of course you will have your own questions. So who could be able to help you? Who has something similar to offer? Who do I need to surpass or overtake in my job, and so on. So different things you can think of from the sector of others. In ripples, looking at maximizing impact, what would be the best use of the time? How could we generate results faster? Who else might we partner up with? Could be either a sector of others or looking at ripples and others together. And questions around energy. So, for example, what energy do I need for this particular task or this sort of work? What sort of emotional state do I have to be in to motivate my employees, and so on. So basically what I want you to always think about is generating your own questions and letting your mind naturally take you to the questions that appear to you within that particular general umbrella or general sector of the wheel. So if we go down to the orange zone in this model, we're looking at, again, 3 strategies that have to do with being able to take action. and they're really to do with leadership. So eliminating things that don't serve you, or the bin strategy, has everything to do with decluttering, saying no, reviewing, editing on a regular basis, trimming, cutting, and so on. So they're all the things that people often don't do at work because, you know, jobs grow up, there's not enough time to redo things and so on. But it's a really, really key strategy for productivity. Magic 5 is the ability to take action and get things done, however short the time. I call it Magic 5 for Magic 5 minutes. And in many of my conditioning programs, I use that strategy to help people be more productive and save time at the end of the day to give themselves some free time. And finally, responsibility is a strategy around taking control and creating results proactively yourself. So this is about not passing the buck to someone else, not saying, well, someone else will do it, but just stepping up. All three of these strategies can be massively improved in a work context. And again, there's some natural questions that can arise from each of the segments. So, you know, bins, things like what or who needs to go, you know, within a particular context of work. What can be outsourced, for example? Looking at Magic 5, what's the key next step? What one action will make the biggest difference? Looking at responsibility, you know, who's going to be accountable for what, and so on. Again, what I'm really keen that you do is, while I give you some of these question ideas, I'd like you to be able to trust the process in your own mind to come up with questions that will be relevant to your anchor, because you're always applying the wheel towards a particular challenge or problem that is your own. Going to the left of the wheel, we have the bullseye strategy, which is really a strategy of keeping priorities, and that is a very difficult thing for the brain to do, particularly in the current context of the world, because we tend to lose focus. In fact, things like mindfulness programs are all returning as a way of getting our brains to focus again. The brain easily defocuses, and that's not so good. Strategy of completion, mastering endings. Now, there are a lot of instruments that profile people in their ability to complete, and it is a key aspect of productivity. So again, we're looking at, you know, completion, meaning either finishing things off, sometimes cutting things because they're not coming to fruition, and a strategy of planning, so having specific plans. Now, strangely enough, these strategies in the workplace are often already in pretty good shape. They're used by people, but many times they can still be further improved. And again, we have some questions related to these particular segments around, you know, what are the key priorities, what is our USP, for example, looking at completion, you know, what does the end result look like? Or what does success look like if we're, you know, if we're making a profit, or if our product is the best, what is that product like, and how can we keep it there? And plans. So what, you know, what specific steps do we have to take? What can we learn from someone else who's done a similar plan, and so forth. And finally, the last segment of the wheel, looking at 3 strategies around standards, milestones, and facts. Now, standards are, of course, having very specific performance criteria. So many of you had a standard to show up to the seminar on time. You were here already punctually at noon. That is a standard, and many of us have standards about how we show up with other people. Many of us have standards around our work performance and how we are in our communities, our families, and so on. So standards are very, very key to performance because they allow us to maintain performance over time. Milestones, you know, is about having clear goals. So that's about having targets, KPIs, particular outcomes, and working to them. And there's a lot of research into goals and their importance. And finally, facts. So working with what is. Now, many times what I'm seeing people do is they work with assumptions. They get into groupthink. They might work in departmental silos, and so on. So while these things do often in companies or organizations look good on paper, so, you know, many places have standards, they have their plan charts, and they have their milestones, they have facts and strategies. In practice, these things don't always fruit the same way that they look on a piece of paper. And again, we have some questions that come up from these zones that are listed here on the left as ideas. But again, your own mind will direct you to something else. Now, what's really key about that particular sector is that oftentimes the questions that come out of here can seem a bit direct. So sort of, how do you know this is true? Or, for example, do you have a standard? So they can put people on the spot. So I would just recommend that you ask them slightly gently, but at the same time remain focused. Success. Well, these strategies, when implemented, and when you use the wheel and think this way, you will get a lot of good results. But what I have found over the last few years is that many of the people I work with on long-term leadership programs come and become amazing. And then they ask this question of, so what? Because what is true, and perhaps in particular in the Western world, but I think also everywhere around the world, is that part of our existence as human beings is around searching for deeper meaning and a deeper level of satisfaction than perhaps these external measures of success like money, companies, and so on. And so what that's made me really realize was that the 12 strategies were missing something. And what they were missing, in my view, was a heart. That sense of identity, that sense of passion, integrity, the bit that we actually connect over. And this was a topic of my TED Talk earlier this year, but actually when I put that into the model, it really became real. And I think that is now really, really important. So at the center of the model is the heart. Now, what does that mean? It means, bringing our authentic selves to life, living and working with the truth, living our values, working for a company that gets you, working for a manager that gets you, and being able to enjoy that, because that's when you're giving your best. And what that means is that, if you're working with the heart within a team or an organization, you're able to work on the fundamental things that are going on. Some of the feelings, for example, so it could be excitement, it could be that you're going through a process of change, it could be that you're disappointed. But whatever it is, you're really working with the truth and reality. So it's like fact, but it's got much more personality to it. And it happens to be the lowest used strategy in the work context of all the 13 strategies, because it's the hardest one for people to feel vulnerable enough to actually disclose. But it is fundamentally key. So again, there are some questions related to the heart strategy. What do we fear the most, or what do you fear the most? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What makes you try harder? Who inspires you, and so on. So these questions will always cut to the real, true nature of the other person and to yourself, and they're really, really important. So how do we put it all together? Well, to put it all together, we have to start off with an anchor or a conversation for the topic. So it could be a challenge or an issue to be discussed. We can then go straight for the heart questions. We can say, how does that make you feel, or what do you think about this, or who inspires you around that particular area, and so on. We can examine questions from any of the other 12 sectors, and then we can revisit them as we need to, because they will create extra synergy. And what that means is that, whereas normally people will cut straight to facts or straight to plans, or maybe they'll go straight to others, we can delegate this work. Some of these will be forgotten, because just as I told you at the beginning, the brain will have a natural tendency to pick some of these sectors more than others. And the whole point that we're trying to do is to get the person to visit all 13 sectors to create richer thinking. And we can do that in about 15 to 20 minutes. And at the end, we've generated something that is more resonant with the person, more true, and is probably of higher quality in my experience. And then we can check for buy-in from the person, and then we'll go and make it happen. So that's the Get Productive wheel in a nutshell. Now, what have I seen be the case with this wheel? Now, I think that one of the key things that it does allow for is that it gives people the capacity to stay focused and be able to get results in less time. So people who try this on and do it, every day, it's like mind conditioning power. It builds focus, it creates more possibilities, it adds drive, and it builds much more impact. It is rooted in how your brain naturally works, so it requires no study. Now, the wheel is helpful to have as a reference point at the start, but you will quickly memorize it, and you'll find yourself using it and asking yourself these questions from different sectors just very naturally. It can be applied to any issue or challenge, because the focus or the anchor is yours, so you can apply it to, how do I raise my brand? You can apply it to how do I transform my company? How do I make this team more productive, and so forth. It uses natural curiosity and simple questions that we learned as children. So it's something that anyone can do. It doesn't matter if you're left brain, right brain, if you have people skills or if you don't have people skills. If you've studied a lot already and you know a lot about coaching, fantastic. I work on this model with experienced professional coaches. But you could be completely new to this area, and I'm pretty sure that we all will raise your thinking quality for you and for others. Now, applications of this approach, they do develop focus, they will increase options and create better ideas, they'll get you motivated and engaged, they will produce better quality thinking. I have this, from many, many people that we've tried this with so far. They will develop resilience, and they're also great for team development because everyone can work on these strategies at the same time. So that creates a much more richer conversation. And they can be used for changing organizational culture. So we've tried to use this approach, one-to-one with people. You can use it on yourself. You can use it with a group that you don't know or a team that you work with on a regular basis, or you could use it in your whole business. There are two things that can go wrong with this approach from my experience. The first one is that you lose the anchor during the conversation. Now, this is something that, as I mentioned earlier, our brains need focus, conditioning. They defocus really quickly. You can notice this very fast, that people drift from an original topic about, how do I get a job, to finishing off with something in a totally different space. So one of the key things that you have to do is pin down the anchor right at the start, and then keep at it. So you're asking every sector question in relation to the anchor that you've decided on. So that's very important. Questions over time can switch from open and curious to leading questions or even closed questions. Now, if you're doing this for yourself, it's very different. But when you're working with someone else in a coaching capacity, you have to remember that your job is to ask questions that will help the other person think. So stick to the sort of questions that are really clear, like starting off with how, who, what, where, because those questions tend to be less likely to be leading or closed. They're generally open questions. And of course, some people will say, well, I've forgotten some of the sectors, and maybe I've only remembered 8 of the sectors, Magdalena. And I would just say, print a copy of the wheel, have it to hand to support you. At some point with regular practice, these things will actually change the way your brain is thinking. Because fundamentally, brain is a muscle, and if you're using it, it will be better and sharper. If you're not using it, it will atrophy, and it'll be very difficult to think and come up with original ideas. But one thing I want to say is that I think most people think creativity and resourcefulness and good quality thinking is a sort of area for just a few, and that is definitely not true. All of our brains are very, very rich and very resourceful. So I want to leave you with a few further resources on this topic. If you're particularly interested in tools for coaching as a manager, I'd like to highly recommend 2 books for you. The first one by Carol Pemberton, one of my colleagues and good friends. But this is a particularly amazing book that I read, I think, about 6 years ago or 5 years ago, and it's stuck in my mind because it is just the most practical book for managers and takes you through step-by-step examples of how to do this kind of work. Positively Speaking, The Art of Constructive Conversations is a wonderful book that shows you how to work with what works, how to be able to look at the positive results and to actually generate and engage people in more resourceful thinking that way. It's a very particular approach, also highly recommended. And Time to Think by Nancy Klein is an original philosophy about how to help other people think on their own by creating sort of space for good quality thinking. And my approach is very, very related to Nancy Klein. It is just probably faster. There are some online resources that I would also highly recommend. The first one I found in researching this seminar, in fact, and it highlights generational characteristics that one ought to consider, not just for coaching, but also in working with people as a manager and how we communicate with people from different generations. So that's very helpful. And 2 very inspiring TED Talks that I think will make you laugh, will touch your heart, and they're just particularly relevant to this topic. I'd like to also give you some information about this particular training in case you're wanting to pursue that further. That's available on our website, maketimeCount.com. And finally, I'd encourage you to stay in touch with me. There's different ways of doing so. I am on LinkedIn, and I do welcome people connecting with me anytime. I do Twitter from time to time, although not too much. Our events around Get Productive are available in London at the moment through Eventbrite, and you can search for Get Productive. And of course, have a look at my TED Talk video with the link there. And if you don't have a copy of Get Productive, then I'd recommend you get one. Thank you very much, and we'll start with questions.
Oh, many thanks for that very insightful webinar, Magdalena. As you just said, if you have any questions, now's the time to send them in. You can do that by the Q&A section on WebEx. We've had a couple that have already come in, so we'll just kick off with those straight away. Magdalena, somebody's asked, what do you think are the key derailers in getting people to excel?
The key derailers in getting people to excel is probably courage of your conviction. So, you know, I've seen people, particularly in larger companies, you know, I've worked with other people, colleagues on talent development programs, which are all around taking employees that are lower down the rank and accelerating them. And in conversations with them one-to-one, you often see that they have tremendously good ideas for business. But partly maybe, as the research that I quoted earlier on says, many people are afraid to talk to their managers. And so those ideas just don't come forward. So being able to establish a culture of courage, of being able to have those ideas be spoken out is very, very important.
Okay, thank you. So good open lines of communication and
that's right.
Courage in your conviction. Thank you. And one more here. In your experience of developing others, what is the key to success?
I would probably say perseverance, resilience, and perseverance. So I'm always inspired by, you know, people who start out in business, who start their own companies, and the ability to keep going when things are really hard. I was just attending a workshop by a lady who launched a company called Noodle, and it was an inspirational talk about someone who, you know, believes as an artist, is an inventor, and who believes in the product. And being able to have that resilience when things are not looking good, when life really tests you.
Okay, very good, thank you. And lastly, you put forward quite a strong argument with your Get Productive wheel that coaching can pretty much fix anything. Do you think that's true? Would you say?
Well, Andrew Murray won the tournament, so can it do it? I think coaching can do it under the right conditions. Condition number one, the coachee has to be willing. You know, we can bring a hose to water, but we can't make it drink. So you have to have a natural hunger in a coachee and an openness to learning. But openness to learning in business now is probably the most differentiating factor for people who will succeed longer term, because information just turns over so quickly. So that's probably, you know, really, really key, is people who are able to be open. I think coaching, I've never seen a case in coaching that has failed. Mm-hmm. So it can do a lot, but I'm sure it's not a panacea for every single thing.
Sure. But with most things, you get out of it what you put into it at the end of the day.
That's true, although equally, you know, I draw a lot on sports psychology, and I think that you do need to have the right coach. And many people will say that, you know, there's no such thing as the wrong coach, but I think that if you want results fairly quickly, you have to get the right match.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Those are all the questions we've had in so far. But please, if you think of anything after today regarding this webinar, as Magdalena said, she's very happy to be contacted via LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can come directly to the Alumni Relations Office. Oh, we have just had one more come in. I think we've got time to look at that now. The question is, as mentioned, heart is the heart. Difference in age and working style could be a high wall in making the heart. Any suggestions?
I'm not really sure what this question is really trying to ask. I'm having slightly trouble understanding the question. But, you know, differences in age and working styles, yes, they exist. Now, many managers and leaders these days can be sometimes younger than the people they're managing in their business or that they have hired. But at the end of the day, you know, I come from a humanistic school of thought which says that if you are honest, no matter what the message is, you'll be able to connect and work through any conflict that you have with anybody, get down to what really matters and so on. So I think age, even working style, as long as you really understand what someone else needs and if you're able to understand what you need and talk about those needs, you'll be able to do that. And I say this because I'm a nationally qualified mediator, and I've done that a number of times with people who, you know, believe that their separations were greater than they actually were. So I hope that answers the question somewhat, but feel free to elaborate on your question and we might be able to post the answer to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's time for us to finish the webinar now. Many thanks, Magdalena, for those great insights. I'm sure you've helped a lot of people there who'll be able to continue to get the best from their staff, colleagues and clients. And thank you for all those listening. Just to add, we always want to continue evaluating and further developing our webinar offering. So please, we'd ask you to respond to the online evaluation form, which you'll be taken to after this webinar closes. It's your opportunity to give us some really useful feedback on how we can continue to deliver future webinars on subjects that are of interest to you. If you don't have a chance to fill it in immediately, you'll also be emailed the link. And also just to say, if you want to pass this on to any of your colleagues after this event, it will be posted on the Imperial College Business School Alumni website, and it will be available on our social media sites. So it's there for you as a resource after this date. So many thanks to everyone listening, and many thanks to Magdalena for an excellent webinar.
My pleasure. Thank you.